Welcome to Scrum Masters Elite_UK. Here, we don't just talk about rugby, we talk about transitions. About the people behind the symbols like the All Blacks. If you want to understand rugby in a deeper and more authentic way, subscribe to the channel. The story of New Zealand Rugby announcing the identity of a former All Blacks player joining the panel to select the new head coach is far from a dry piece of sports news. It clearly reflects how New Zealand Rugby is looking inward during a highly sensitive period of transition. This is a moment when every decision, every individual chosen, carries not only professional responsibility but also symbolic weight for the identity, tradition, and future of the All Blacks, a team widely regarded as the sporting soul of the nation. What immediately caught my attention was the deliberate mystery surrounding the identity of the former All Black invited onto the selection panel. Steve Lancaster's decision to keep the name confidential in the early stages shows that New Zealand Rugby fully understands the power of media and public opinion. The All Blacks are not just a team, every move related to them is dissected, judged, and even politicized within the sporting sphere. Delaying the announcement can therefore be seen as a way to manage reactions, avoid premature judgments, and allow internal processes to run with greater calm. When the name Dane Coles was revealed, my reaction was logical, but far from simple. Dane Coles is not a neutral figure. He is a player full of personality, outspoken, sometimes controversial, yet fiercely loyal to the All Blacks ethos. 90 test caps over more than a decade, along with over 140 appearances for the Hurricanes, represent not just statistics but a lifetime spent in the highest pressure environment in world rugby. Inviting a recently retired player onto the head coach selection panel suggests that New Zealand Rugby is trying to inject the breath of the present into a decision with long-term strategic consequences.
From an emotional standpoint, I appreciate this choice. Dane Coles represents a generation of players who have lived through the All Blacks' clear highs and lows, from near-total dominance to recent years, when the aura of invincibility has faded. He understands both the feeling of winning and the weight of defeat. He understands the changing room, and the evolving relationship between players and coaching staff in modern rugby, where authority no longer rests solely with the head coach as it once did. That said, this sensible choice also raises unavoidable questions. Is a recently retired player sufficiently detached and cool-headed to be involved in governance-level decision-making? Dane Coles has deep personal relationships with potential candidates, current players, and the domestic rugby system. This is both a strength, because of his insight, and a risk, because personal emotions and memories can affect objectivity. Perhaps New Zealand Rugby accounted for this by placing him within a multi-member panel that includes experienced administrators and rugby figures such as Kevin Melamu and Don Tricker. Kevin Melamu's presence on the panel also carries strong symbolic meaning. Two former hookers from different generations sitting together to decide the future of the All Blacks. It feels like New Zealand Rugby is intentionally creating a bridge between tradition and modernity. Melamu represents an era of stability, discipline, and sustained success. Coles represents a more emotional, open era marked by greater challenges. If managed well, this combination could produce a genuinely balanced perspective. Another notable point is New Zealand Rugby's confirmation that the application deadline has passed and the process has moved into the interview stage. This suggests a relatively structured and disciplined approach, rather than one driven entirely by public pressure. In the aftermath of the shock departure of Scott Robertson, rushing the decision could lead to mistakes. Moving step by step, even slowly, signals a necessary sense of caution. When we turn to the potential candidates, the picture becomes far more complex and intriguing. Dave Rennie and Jamie Joseph are widely seen as the leading contenders, yet neither has publicly expressed a desire to return to the All Blacks. To me, this highlights an important reality. The All Blacks head coach role is both an honor and a hot seat that not everyone is willing to occupy at this moment. Dave Rennie, with experience leading the Wallabies and working in Japan, brings a distinctly international perspective. He understands opponents and rugby beyond New Zealand, something the All Blacks may have lacked in recent years due to an excessive inward focus. However, his current commitments with the Highlanders and Kobe Steelers raise questions about long-term availability and commitment. Jamie Joseph is different. He has a deep emotional connection to the All Blacks and achieved success with Japan in a very Joseph-like way, disciplined, creative, and maximizing limited resources. If appointed, I believe he would bring fresh tactical thinking, particularly in attacking structure and playing style flexibility. But the pressure would be immense. Success with Japan does not guarantee success with the All Blacks, where expectations are always set at the highest level. New Zealand Rugby's outreach to Sir Steve Hansen and Ian Foster leaves me feeling conflicted. On one hand, they are experienced figures who understand the All Blacks system and culture deeply. On the other, returning to familiar faces could be perceived as a lack of courage for genuine renewal. If Hansen or Foster were to return, whether as head coach or assistant, the key question would be what new ideas they bring. Rather than simply offering familiar safety, the decision to limit candidates to New Zealanders with international coaching experience shows that New Zealand Rugby is prioritizing identity and internal understanding over bold experimentation. I understand this logic, especially for a team with such strong national symbolism as the All Blacks. However, in an increasingly globalized rugby world, this criterion also narrows the pool of new ideas. The unavailability or self-exclusion of figures like John Mitchell, Vern Cotter, and Joe Schmidt further thins the candidate list and increases selection pressure. Names such as Warren Gatland, Kieran Crowley, and Wayne Pivac meet the criteria, yet they do not inspire a strong sense of emotional certainty. They are capable and experienced, but the question remains, are they truly right for the All Blacks at this particular stage? Right now, the All Blacks need more than tactical expertise. They need a leader who can redefine belief, reconnect the team with its supporters, and build a long-term vision that extends beyond a single World Cup cycle. Rumours of Ian Foster potentially returning as an assistant coach, especially if Jamie Joseph is appointed, are particularly intriguing. Such a setup could create a coaching group balanced between experience and innovation. At the same time, it carries the risk of philosophical conflict if roles and authority are not clearly defined. Overall, what impresses me most about this entire story is not the list of candidates or specific names, but the way New Zealand Rugby is trying to walk a very fine line between tradition and change. Bringing in Dane Coles, a recently retired player, onto the selection panel is the clearest expression of that effort. It is a statement that the voices of the modern playing generation matter, that the All Blacks do not belong only to a glorious past, but must also be shaped by those who have only just stepped off the field. I don't know what the final decision will be, and perhaps no one truly does. But if there is one thing that can be said with confidence, it is this. This selection process will leave a lasting mark on the All Blacks, regardless of the outcome. It reflects how New Zealand confronts pressure, change, and its own identity in an ever-evolving rugby world. And as someone following this story, I feel both anxious and hopeful, because sometimes, it is precisely during periods of uncertainty like this that a great team rediscovers its path.
The All Blacks are at a pivotal moment, where every decision shapes the future of the team. If you love in-depth perspectives, not just news, but the stories behind elite rugby, subscribe to Scrum Masters Elite_UK and join us on this journey.